Congressman, you just spoke to 12,000 youth here at PowerShift '09. What does it represent that 12,000 students and young people came down here to Washington to speak directly to their senators, to their congressmen? What does it mean to you?
Well, it means that there's a giant green wave that has built across the country that is now sweeping into Washington, D.C. We saw the first effect of it in the election, and now the inauguration of Barack Obama on January 20th. It's a little more than a month later, and there are 12,000 green generation activists here in the city, and I think it's just representative of how much change and how short a period of time it's going to take to reflect this revolution that has been pent up really for about 10 years.
You talked about in your speech that any major movement has actually started with the youth. Can you mention some of the movements that you think are emblematic and how this movement will follow those?
Well, the suffragette movement had young women who were upset that they could not vote, and they changed the law. In South Africa, young people rose up because they were upset with apartheid, and they changed the law and freed Nelson Mandela. The civil rights movement in the South rose up to ensure that African Americans had the right to vote, and they changed those laws. And I think that this green generation is now about to have a legislative revolution that takes place that makes America the leader and not the laggard in the world in fighting greenhouse gases.
You talked about President Barack Obama coming into office like going from a kerosene lamp to a compact fluorescent bulb. What do you mean by that?
Well, it's like going from narrowband to broadband. It's like going from a black rotary dial phone to a BlackBerry. It's like going from dial-up to an unlimited renewable capacity. That's what's happening. We're about to have a technological revolution that changes the way that we relate to the environment and, by the way, on national security, the way that we employ ourselves, and just pretty much our relationship with the planet in general. All will take place because of a technological revolution that, having been pent up, is now going to be unleashed.
Congressman, let's talk about legislation. Stimulus bill just passed, a lot of good stuff in there for clean energy. What are some of the highlights from the stimulus bill first before we go on to the new legislation?
Well, there's $11 billion in that legislation for a new electric internet so that we can move electricity in from the prairies and the deserts and off of people's roofs into the electricity grid that will power our country. There's about $20 billion in the legislation in order to fund this next generation over the next 3 years of wind and solar and geothermal and other renewable resources that will double the amount of electricity generated from renewables just in 3 years. There's billions more to weatherize homes, to invest in new science of new energy technologies. So it's altogether about $70 to $80 billion in that one bill, but we see it as just the first step of what we're going to do this year.
Well, let's talk about next steps then. Climate change action, climate change legislation. Some have said better to wait till 2010. Some have said better to gain some more steam, put some more stuff in place, and get some momentum, and then go for a bigger type of action in 2010. What do you say to those folks, and what is your feeling about legislative action this year?
Well, I don't know who those folks are, and therefore I wouldn't want to personally impugn their political judgment. But I would say that the time is ripe. President Obama is at the peak of his popularity. There's no guarantees about the future. And so I would say the future is now. Let's try to get the best possible bill we can now. And I don't think anyone should try to save up their energy for next year or the year after. I think that all the things that we're seeing President Obama achieve in child health and closing Guantanamo, and you go down this whole litany, why should saving the planet wait? Let's start on that agenda now.
Congressman, you participated on this past Monday with Majority Leader Harry Reid, Speaker Pelosi, many others in the energy summit that Harry Reid convened over at the museum. What is your sense in terms of the Senate and the House? The Senate seems to want to create its own energy bill initially and then move to climate change after that, and there seems to be a lot of great momentum there to definitely get both tackled this year. On the House side, it looks like there may be a drive to combine some of that. What's your feeling about the Senate and the House and how that might come together in the end?
Well, the end game is always unpredictable in Congress. So we're going to do the best we can in the House of Representatives. That's all that I and Henry Waxman and Nancy Pelosi have any control over. What the Senate does, the Senate will do. And then we will, at the end of the day, try to find a way of having all of the good energy provisions and a very strong CO2 control bill pass in the Congress, and do so this year and put it on President Obama's desk.
In terms specifically of renewable electricity standard, what's your sense of the goal that the House and Senate should go after? What goal in terms of percentage by what year should we go after?
Well, President Obama has called for 25% by 2025. That's the legislation that I've introduced into Congress, 25% by 2025. That's the gold standard. That's what we should be trying to achieve.
Who's going to step up to oppose that, to lobby against it? How do you counter their efforts?
Well, we passed through the House legislation that would mandate 15% of electricity by 2020 in 2007. So the same opponents will show up from the utility industry in all of its manifestations. But I just think that the course of history is so dramatically different now. We're going down a different path with President Obama, with all the additional members of the House and Senate that we now have. I think that we can be much more ambitious than we were in 2007. It was stopped in the Senate because they didn't have 60 votes in 2007. But I don't think that we should be anything less than really ambitious about the high goals that we should have. And once we set it, I think not only will we meet it, but I think we'll exceed those goals by 2025. I think there'll be a technological revolution that will reduce the cost, revolutionize the technology, and far exceed anything that we think is possible today.
Council, let me ask you one question internationally. Some have said, what about China? Why are we acting before China does, or why are we acting independently of China? China and the U.S. are roughly equal right now in greenhouse gas emissions in terms of percentage of total global. What's your feeling about China specifically? What stance should we have in terms of China in encouraging them to join in this particular movement, but also acting independently as a leader?
Well, it is true that China and the United States are now relatively equal in the amount of CO2 that's going up in the air today. But CO2 is cumulative. And so most of the CO2 that's up there is red, white, and blue, or European. And so the Chinese and the Indians are saying to us, you can't preach temperance from a bar stool. You can't tell us to stop after you've received the benefits of it for 200 years in your industrialization. So I think in order to have any credibility, we have to pass our legislation so that we go to Copenhagen. We begin international negotiations saying we're going to do it. Now we expect you, as you industrialize, as you build modern steel and utility and aluminum plants, to put the controls in now. And that's why I think all of this is so important, and why I think this whole gathering that I spoke at tonight is so important, because we don't have time to waste.
Final question. Let's come back to the youth that are here at PowerShift 09. What would you say to youth that are not here among the 12,000, other students on other college campuses? What would you say to them in terms of what you need as a legislator to get this stuff done?
Well, yes, ultimately the legislation is going to have to pass here in Washington, but the pressure on congressmen to act is back home. The real action is going to be back home. So if young people are on their college campuses, if they're at home or at work and they care about this issue, then they should organize to go and visit their member of Congress, visit their senator back home. Let them know that there are electoral consequences if that member of Congress votes against the change we need in order to save the planet. That's where all the action is. It's back home. it's great to have this big rally here in Washington, but the real action is going to be if people do it in their own congressional districts, in their own home states.
Great. Thank you, Congressman.
Thank you.